We're the Tasmanian Fire Group, and we're here at Risdon Cove today to develop some indicators to help us introduce traditional burning into our practices on how we manage this land. Risdon Cove was used by our old people to round up kangaroo and to feed for them, and not only took from the land their feast but also their knowledge. You look around us now, we're about 5k from the centre of Hobart, so we're right in the middle of the establishment of European settlement. But over the history of European settlement in Tasmania, they have hot fires which has been causing problems with the landscape and the trees. It's not necessarily to have hot fires which cause a lot of harm. It's about knowing how and when to burn, and this project, the traditional fire project, is going to help us achieve that goal.
So since the early 1800s there's a long history of agriculture, so mainly grazing and some cropping. So over large parts of the property now is this phalaris grass, mixtures of cocksfoot and phalaris and introduced grasses, which are really dominating most of the landscape and starting to push into some of the bush areas. Mixed in with that though, there is still a lot of native species which exist, and they're sort of hanging on and clinging on around the edges and in the parts of the bush that weren't fertilised and ploughed so much. So what we're really trying to do is look at ways of trying to help the country revert back to more of a native ecosystem.
This is a block of the land that we done a trial burn on in September last year, just to see how it would react. As you can see here, we've got some regrowth of native grass around the tussocks where they'd burn away.
And this is just a large build-up of dead tussock. And as you can see, nothing can come up through. So we've got to burn it out.
By timing the right time of year to do this burn, we'll get rid of all this with a low temperature burn and get it so the native grass has a chance to regrow in this area.
So what we've got here is good dark soil, which is it's typical for any sort of eucalypt area. And what we're going to do is we're going to keep the burn nice and cool so that it doesn't destroy. This dirt, it soaks up, it absorbs heat, and it absorbs heat will destroy the seed bank, and that'll make it less probable of natives come back up.
Maybe in the late afternoon we'll start looking at finding an ignition point and allow a cool burn to trickle through the evening and into the night when a dew will set and put our fire edge out.
Well, we're just outside these two big trees here, and what we've noticed is we've got 3 types of different native grass growing out here. It's only because these trees here are making a bit more of a shade for them, and it's growing a lot more. You see out here, you've got a lot more phalaris, and it's just choking up the land. If you just look down here, we've got these 3 grasses. So what was that one there, Adrian?
So we've got these little native pole grasses here, and also another larger species, as well as this wallaby grass, which is another native. And there's also these little herbs like this milaythina-ta and these little herbs here. So part of the story also on this property, sort of complementary to the fire management, is to do planting. So we've got a series of belts of trees that we've planted in. And so, we're hoping that through those plantings that we can get some good, strong patches of vegetation which connect up, the different various blocks that we have, which still do have remnant veg on them. So they'll contribute to the greater objective of, trying to make this this property more of a native grassland, woodland environment.
So here's one of our younger gum trees. You can see it's getting choked up here by the introduced grasses. So we'll need to come in here, our first burn, and clear around some of these little trees so the fire doesn't hurt the tree. And as we go on, we can forget about clearing around trees when we remove all this vegetation and get it back to a natural state.
So I mean, we're looking at a problem that's taken over 200 years to get where it's got. So, you know, we're not looking at simple solutions that are going to turn back the clock. But what we are trying to do is, you know, build on our knowledge slowly over time, so we can get to a stage where we're heading in a direction that we want to go in. And otherwise, you know, really what's happening here at the moment is it's just getting worse and worse. The problem isn't getting any better. We're at Patrula, or otherwise known as Oyster Cove. We're down here to look at the country and think about some of our fire management. This is a different type of vegetation and different type of country than the property at Risdon Cove. It's a taller eucalypt forest with sort of a more heathy understory. So we're going to, as we'll see, it's an area that isn't looking real good. It's sort of really sort of heavily filled up with bracken, and the fuel loads are getting really high. So what we want to do is start to have a look at some of that and come up with a plan to restore some of that country.
So as you can see right through here, it's all bracken fern. There's no diversity at all, and if a wildfire was to approach our country here, we'll have scars right up to the tops of these trees. This landscape ain't meant to look like that. We will also have our residents up here, our neighbours, and we'll contact them and hopefully they'll come down and be a part of what we need to do here. You can see the amount of fuel load, which is just a time bomb ticking. We need to reduce these fuel loads. Our old people kept this bracken fern down, and it allowed plants to grow in for their medicines and you know, food.
So this fruit here is really sweet. It's absolute delicious. Our old fellas, you know, would have pigged out on this here. The young ones would have loved it, and it would have been everywhere, because the old fellas, you know, they burnt the right way, which encouraged the growth of these fruits here. When we plan to burn here, we plan to burn a real cool fire, and that cool fire will make sure it won't destroy the few remaining bush tucker plants we've got here.
So one of the indicators that's what's happening here is that a lot of the vegetation species are in decline as a result of the lack of fire, and the thickness of the bracken and understory is these Banksia species. So a lot of these are just pretty much dead, sick and dying with no new recruitment anywhere of any new seedlings. So it's pretty clear from the state of a lot of these that something's not working here. So we're hoping that we're going to be able to change that. In under the canopy of the forest, there's these areas of peat moss, which are quite beautiful to look at. So when we do our burns, we don't want to totally clear everything off the forest floor. So we've got some of these nice wet areas of moss, and these have their place here. So we want to make sure that we don't burn everything out. So it's quite moist, so a cool fire will just go around it and won't burn it out. But what's happening is the fuel loads are starting to pile on top of some of these areas. So when a fire comes through, it will be decimated. The fuel will just sort of consume everything. After a few burns, and the burns are cool and really controlled, they'll just be areas that the fire travels around. So there's different sorts of peat and peat moss. But this one seems like quite a shallow surface one, but we still want to protect it. You know, it still has its place. So we're up in a patch of bush that's had a bushfire through it 12 months ago. a wildfire came through here in January. And what we can see here is what we want to avoid with our fire management. So we've got evidence of a hot fire that's gone through and really badly scorched the trees. We've got this thick level of bracken fern, which is pretty much all that's regenerated in this site, and is one of the symptoms of a too hot burn that's come through. So when we're doing our fire management on our land, we don't want to have this situation where we get this big influx of solid bracken fern. So at our last site, we could see that the bracken fern had built up huge, big thick fuel loads like this. And so that's going to build up another heavy fuel load. So if we get more hot fires coming through, wildfires at the wrong time, then that's really going to scorch bad again and just repeat this cycle. And it's just going to cause more stress on everything unnecessarily. So animal habitat is also impacted by something like this. The food's gone and a lot of the habitat, the tree habitat, is also taken away. So it can take a fairly long time for that to start to work again. This makes me feel like that this is a place where something bad's happened. We really need to make sure that this sort of thing isn't the common scene in the landscape. Yeah, we want to see a situation where all land in Tasmania is managed so that this sort of thing can be avoided. And that's something that we want to work towards, get towards where fire becomes something that is used to protect rather than fire is something that happens to destroy. So that's the long-term aim for us, and I'm sure that there'd be a lot of other people who would see that as a worthwhile direction to be going in. So somehow, that if we can come together and work towards something like that, that's a good long-term aim.